I am 95 years old, and I have outlived almost everyone who remembers me as a young man. That sounds like an achievement when you say it quickly. It isn't. It's mostly a long hallway with the lights turned low and doors that don't open anymore. I don't have much time left. The doctor didn't say it that way, but he didn't need to. When you're 95, time doesn't stretch. It gathers itself. I've made mistakes, not loud ones. Not the kind that make newspapers or split families in a single night. Mine were quiet. 6 of them. They followed me year after year, and I mistook them for virtues. The first was believing there would always be more time. When I was 26, I married a woman named Clara. She had a narrow face and a way of listening that made you feel steadier than you were. We lived in a small brick house with thin walls and a furnace that knocked in the winter. I worked at the factory then. Long shifts. 6 days most weeks. I told myself it was temporary, just until we got ahead. Clara used to sit at the kitchen table in the evenings with her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. She'd say, "You're tired," and I'd nod. She'd start to tell me something about her day, about the neighbor's baby or the tomatoes in the yard, and I would drift. Not because I didn't care, because I thought there would be tomorrow. There was always tomorrow. When our first son was born, I stood at the foot of the hospital bed and promised her things. I said I'd be home more. I said I'd slow down once we had some savings. I meant it. I believed it. But promotions came. Overtime came. Responsibility came. Each one felt like proof that I was doing the right thing. There's a particular evening I remember. My boy must have been 5. He had a paper crown on his head from school, some little performance. Clara told me about it that morning. I said I'd try to make it. At work, a machine went down near the end of my shift. My supervisor asked me to stay. I didn't hesitate. I told myself my son wouldn't remember one school play. I told myself being dependable was more important. When I came home, the crown was on the kitchen counter. Bent. He was asleep. I stood there longer than I needed to. But even then, I didn't think of it as loss. I thought of it as trade. That was my first mistake. I treated time like something I could budget and carry over. The second mistake was mistaking duty for love. I was a steady husband. I paid bills on time. I fixed things before they broke. I didn't drink much. I never strayed. But I did not sit down enough. Clara would ask me to walk with her after dinner. Just around the block. I'd say I had paperwork, or that my feet hurt. Sometimes they did. Years went by like that. She stopped asking so often. I told myself she understood, that she knew I loved her because I worked hard. One winter night, when we were in our late 40s, the power went out. Snow pressed against the windows. We lit candles and sat at the table without the radio, without the television. It was quiet. Uncomfortably so. She looked at me and said, "I don't know when we stopped talking." I remember feeling defensive. I said, "We're talking now." But that wasn't what she meant, and I knew it. The power came back an hour later. The lights flickered on, and with them, the noise. We never finished that conversation. That was the shape of our marriage. No explosions, just small absences. My third mistake was postponing apologies. My father was a difficult man, hard in his words, harder in his silences. I spent much of my 20s trying not to become him. When I was 32, we argued about something small. It always was something small. He said I thought I was better than him because I had a supervisory title. I told him he'd never understand responsibility. He stood in his doorway when I left. I can still see his hand on the frame. He looked older than I'd ever noticed. I meant to go back the next week, to smooth it over. But pride has a way of stretching days. He had a stroke that winter. By the time I saw him in the hospital, his speech was gone. His eyes followed me, but his mouth wouldn't move the way he wanted it to. I talked. I filled the room with words I should have said months before. He stared at me, and I couldn't tell if he understood. He died 2 days later. I told myself he knew. Maybe he did. But I never heard it from him, and he never heard it from me. That gap never closed. The fourth mistake was believing achievement would feel different. In my 50s, I reached a position I'd chased for years, an office with a door, my name etched on a little metal plate. I thought I'd feel taller somehow, settled. Instead, I felt tired. By then, my sons were grown. One had moved across the country. The other lived only 20 minutes away, but rarely visited without a reason. Clara had started volunteering at the library. She'd found a circle of women who met on Thursdays. She didn't wait for me in the evenings anymore. She had her own rhythm. I would sit in my office after everyone left, looking at the framed certificates on the wall. They were neat, impressive, I suppose, but they did not speak back. I began to notice that the moments I felt most alive were not in meetings or during negotiations. They were small, watching Clara laugh with her friends through the kitchen window, hearing my grandson's uneven footsteps on the porch, and yet I still clung to the job. I told myself stepping back would be irresponsible. I told myself I needed to secure more, just in case. Just in case of what? I never clarified. The fifth mistake was not asking better questions. When Clara turned 72, she began to tire easily. She brushed it off. So did I. We had always been healthy. We walked, we ate sensibly. Illness belonged to other families. She started leaving her tea half-finished. That should have told me something. One afternoon, she sat down at the kitchen table and pressed her palm flat against the wood as if steadying herself. I asked if she was all right. She said, "Just tired." I nodded. I accepted that answer because it was easier. The diagnosis came in late autumn. Pancreatic cancer. Advanced. The doctor spoke in careful tones. Months, he said, not years. I remember looking at Clara. She was very still, almost polite. We drove home in silence. The trees were already bare. Those months were both long and short. We talked more than we had in years. Not about grand things, about the garden, about our sons, about the first apartment we'd rented with the stained carpet and the noisy pipes. One night, she said, "I wish we'd taken that trip to the coast. We had planned it so many times, always postponed. There was work, there were expenses, there was time, we thought." I said, "I'm sorry." She squeezed my hand. "I know," she said. She died in the hospital with a thin blanket pulled to her chin. I was holding her hand. I had held it thousands of times before, but never as carefully as I did then. After she was gone, the house felt staged, as if it belonged to someone else. Her teacups remained in the cabinet, her shoes by the door. I had spent decades assuming we would grow old together. We did, in a way, just not as long as I had pictured. My sixth mistake was thinking I would be remembered more clearly. This one is harder to admit. When you're younger, you believe your presence in a room leaves a mark, that your children will recall your exact voice, that your grandchildren will carry your stories intact. But memory fades faster than we expect. My sons visit. They are good men, busy. They speak to me kindly, but often about practical things. Appointments, repairs, weather. My grandchildren know me as a quiet figure in a chair. Sometimes I start to tell a story from the factory days. I see their eyes drift. I stop mid-sentence. It isn't their fault. Life pulls forward. It does not linger behind. I once found a box of old photographs in the attic. There was one of Clara and me on our wedding day. I was surprised by my own face, so certain, so unaware. I tried to remember what I was thinking in that moment. I couldn't. If I cannot remember myself clearly, how can I expect others to? There's a particular loneliness in being the last witness to your own beginning. I sit most mornings by the window. The street is different now. New houses, new families. Children I don't know ride bicycles where mine once did. Sometimes I think about that paper crown on the kitchen counter, about my father's hand on the doorframe, about the coast we never saw. None of those moments felt decisive at the time. That's the part I want you to understand. Regret does not always arrive as a crash. It seeps in through ordinary days. If I could sit across from the man I was at 35, I wouldn't scold him. He was trying. He loved his family in the only language he thought mattered: provision, stability, endurance. But I would tell him that time is not impressed by good intentions. I would tell him to leave the factory floor once in a while, even if the machine is broken. Machines are always breaking. I would tell him to walk around the block with his wife, even if the paperwork waits. I would tell him to drive back to his father's house before winter sets in. Not because these acts guarantee anything. They don't. Illness would still have come. Death would still have taken who it took. But the texture of my memories would be different. There would be fewer gaps. At 95, the future is a small thing. A few seasons, if I'm fortunate. I do not fear death the way I once did. I fear unfinished sentences more. I speak now because there isn't much reason not to. If you are younger than I am, and you almost certainly are, you will make your own mistakes. They will look sensible at the time. They will wear the clothes of responsibility. Just don't assume you can always circle back. Some doors close without sound. I have had a long life. There was love in it. There was laughter. I am not ungrateful, but gratitude and regret sit side by side. They do not cancel each other out. When my time comes, I expect it will be quiet, a narrowing, a dimming. I hope that in those final hours, I will think less about the office with the metal nameplate and more about the way Clara's hand felt in mine during that winter power outage, when the world went dark and we were forced, briefly, to see each other. That hour might have been enough, if I had understood it. I am 95 years old. I have made my peace with many things. But if I am honest, I would trade a portion of these long, empty afternoons for one ordinary evening back at that kitchen table, before the crown was bent, before the snow fell, before I believed there would always be more time. That is all I have to say.